I want to put something out in the open. I love Pac-Man games. Like, really, okay? The gameplay is addicting, fun, and the games never felt like they were quarter-stealing difficult. This fun, fair staple of the arcades from the 1980s did very well, and as I mentioned in the video on Championship Edition DX+, Pac-Man still holds up to this day. There's no denying it, I love Pac-Man. I mean, I've hung out with the guy, and I even have a Pac-Man mug. See? Pac-Man had cereal, toys, a cartoon show, and a whole bunch of video games released over the years. But a lot of the games weigh in a little bit differently on the scale of regards to just how much like the original Pac-Man arcade game they are. Some were updates to the original Pac-Man maze gameplay with some tweaks and changes, and others were incredibly different, like Pac-Land, based on the cartoon show from Hanna-Barbera, and Pac-in-Time, itself having a very interesting development history. For all the games he's appeared in, however, Pac-Man does have a few, let's say, ghosts in the closet. Namely, one for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. Pac-Man 2, The New Adventures. Known in Japan as Hello Pac-Man, Pac-Man 2 The New Adventures finds us not in the role of Pac-Man, but as a sort of observer to the colorful world he inhabits. Instead of any form of direct control over the Pac himself, we're tasked with directing his attention either verbally or by using a slingshot. Verbal calls for attention will try to get Pac-Man to look in a certain direction. The slingshot, however, is a little bit more, direct. By hitting objects with pellets from the slingshot, we're able to either direct Pac-Man's attention to certain objects, such as doors, signposts, or trash cans, or directly interact with those objects, sometimes with good effects, and sometimes with poor outcomes for our titular hero. So yes, as you can tell, Pac-Man 2 is not a Pac-Man game in the sense that Pac-Man is trapped in a maze munching on pills. He's a family man, going out of his way to get milk for his baby or pick flowers for the neighbor girl his son happens to fancy. The only problem is, Pac-Man's easily distracted, to put it politely. Since we have no real control over Pac-Man, only some influence with the ability to introduce negative reinforcement when necessary, it becomes our job to help shepherd the Pac towards his goals and keep him out of mischief. We can shoot at objects to make them fall down or make a noise to attract Pac-Man's attention, or shoot objects and characters to keep Pac-Man safe, or mess with his day. Nothing ruins a good hot dog like getting mauled by an alley cat, don't you think? The list of things to shoot also includes Pac-Man, who may jump when struck by a pellet, wake up from being knocked out, or just get immensely pissed off at you. Pac-Man's mood determines how he will interact with the objects and characters in the game, and he has a ton of different emotional fluxes you'll encounter. Mild-mannered Pac-Man has a warm grin, ready to help his neighbor push a couch or sneak by characters, and generally has a cheerful demeanor when interacting with things in the game. A mad Pac solves his problems with brute force, taking his frustrations out on his environment and sometimes reaping what he sows in return. Pac-Man's mood can be manipulated, and having him in the right mood is essential to solving certain puzzles, or just plain proceeding through the game. There will be times when you need to have an angry Pac-Man kick things, or a happy Pac-Man to not commit a crime. Sometimes Pac-Man's emotional state is influenced just by what he sees or what happens to him. If he trips on a rock and hits his head, he's not going to be pleased. It's not all negative though. Finding things to eat will typically please Pac-Man, be it from a tree or dirty old pizza in a box from the mines. Seriously, Pac-Man? That's disgusting. Most of the time, the player has a hand in making Pac-Man notice things in the environment. Sometimes hitting something with a pellet is enough to make a noise, or sometimes that object itself will spin or move upon being struck, and Pac-Man's easily distracted mind will immediately cause him to wander over. Washing his face, eating an apple, sitting on a bench, a lot of things will have some form of impact on Pac-Man's mood. Pac-Man knows who we are too, using hand motions or acknowledging the player's input by addressing the camera directly. Sometimes he'll let the player know he is having absolutely none of what you want him to do, and other times will ask directly for the player's assistance in dealing with things he has to overcome. While you can smack the ever-living snot out of Pac-Man all day, it is generally in your best interest to keep him happy, so helping him stay safe and smiling will help you overcome a majority of the obstacles. Since it is a Pac-Man game, the ghost monsters, Inky, Pinky, Blinky, and Clyde, are constantly out to harass Pac-Man. They hide as everyday objects and appear when you shoot them, scaring Pac-Man unless he eats a power pellet supplied by the player to transform into Super Pac-Man and chomp them up. While the game is more about solving basic puzzles of progression, defeating the ghosts is necessary in several spots. What's interesting is that the ghost monster and their boss, the ghost witch, are trying to stop Pac-Man from completing everyday tasks. The ghost monsters and the witch have an endgame plot, yeah, but the ghost witch's reactions to her minions being unable to stop Pac-Man from picking flowers and stuff is just hilarious. She might as well chastise the ghosts for not preventing Pac-Man from doing average, everyday things. Alongside the normal point-and-click style of gameplay, there are action segments, if you want to call them that. Hang gliding and minecart sections force you to tell Pac-Man exactly what to do, while also flicking pellets at him or the environment. This is pretty much the one section of the game where you have more or less full control of Pac-Man, albeit kind of indirectly. His mood is not a factor in these segments, and he will always listen to you to either go higher in the hang glider or go faster in the minecart. While these certainly help break up the mood-based adventuring prevalent in the rest of the game, these segments can be frustratingly hard and will leave most players with Pac-Man crashing into walls or falling to his doom. Also hidden within the world of Pac-Man 2 is something a little bit more fun: arcade games. You can play the original Pac-Man arcade game from the get-go by visiting the arcades in Pac-Man 2, but by finding all the hidden cartridges, Pac-Man can either play Ms. Pac-Man for those of you playing on the SNES, or Pac Jr. on Genesis. Pac Jr. is essentially a reworked version of Ms. Pac-Man. Both games are a lot of fun and nice little distractions for a few minutes. Despite trying something different with the character of Pac-Man and his family, the entire aspect of being an observer and influencer in Pac-Man's world left a pretty bad taste in players' mouths. I mean, yeah, when you think of Pac-Man, your mind probably goes to a yellow orb eating pills in a dark maze being chased by colorful monsters. But Pac-Man has evolved into more than just a maze game, even by 1994 when this game was released. Pac-Man as a brand was already moving in several different directions by this time. Taking Pac-Man out of the maze and putting him into a more tangible environment seemed like a natural move for Namco to make. However, a lot of people write off Pac-Man 2: The New Adventures as a lame attempt to accomplish this. Pac-Land, released 10 years earlier, had an arcade style of gameplay, but Pac-Man 2 has more in common with a point-and-click than it does its predecessor. But honestly, I've always enjoyed this game. I rented it a bunch as a kid, and while I wasn't exactly getting very far every time I did, I loved interacting with Pac-Man's world. Seeing how I could change and manipulate Pac-Man's mood, helping him accomplish his goals, everything about it just made me feel like I was kinda hanging out with Pac and helping him. I was cheering for Pac-Man, laughing at him when he got into trouble, and having a good time. And that's what video games are all about, right? If they're not fun, what's the point? And looking back at this game, 20 years after it came out, I still feel the same way. Maybe that's the nostalgia talking, but there's something about that cheery music and Pac-Man's cute little voice and things like that that just bring a smile to my face. That being said, if you kinda know what you're doing, Pac-Man 2 is incredibly short. The only side quest is finding the game cartridges to play the additional game in the arcade, and the first mission's goal is not very far from Pac-Man's homestead. And nothing actually changes between Pac-Man's errands in the environment, and there really isn't any replay value here. But what is here in Pac-Man 2 is a cute, kooky little game that suffered from misconceptions because of a title and a character. Billing this game as a direct sequel in the West instead of Hello Pac-Man or something similar, I feel had a negative effect on the perception of Pac-Man 2. It was just too different, and it really still is for some people. Considering how cheap this title is though, I'd say check it out. Pac-Man's moody adventures don't last very long, but what is here is a very good time and a lot of fun, either on the Sega Genesis or the Super Nintendo.